I'm a fourth generation Floridian. Both my parents were born in Tampa. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida at the Naval Air Station because my father was based there during the Second World War, actually all the way up to 1948. I am, according to genetic DNA, 98 or 85% Iberian, so mostly Spanish. There's no colonials in my family. We are from Spain.
Interesting. And so you grew up in Florida, and what was your hometown when you were growing up?
Born in Jacksonville, grew up in Miami. And growing up in Miami, especially after the Second World War, there were fields of aircraft that were being transshipped down to Latin America. And my father was involved with that. And as a kid, at 10 or 11, we used to take our bicycles and ride out to the airport, and we would camp out in some of these aircraft, specifically PBYs that had bunk beds in them. So by the time I was 11, there wasn't a military airplane I couldn't get into. And actually, that went all the way through high school. We at one time thought about buying an armored car because you can't imagine the stuff that went from Florida to Latin America. It was huge. I grew up with my cousins, so my closest cousin and I are more like siblings than cousins. And interesting, we also had an influence on each other's military.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, my cousin, he decided to join the Army, and then wanted me to come with him. And while we were in college, and I was dating a girl at the time, and I went, well, yeah, I don't know. I'm still hormonally active here in the States, so I think I'll pass on it for the time being. But I had actually been in the service before he was. When I was 17, my father decided it was time for me to join the Naval Reserve. So I started out in Miami in the Naval Reserve at 17.
Very interesting. And you said your father you have more family that did serve as well?
Yes, my father served in the Navy. My uncle was a CB. My cousin, the family has always been in the military. And oh, by the way, my grandfather came here as a prisoner of war from the Spanish-American War. He was a Spanish colonial soldier based out of Cuba and was surrendered, taken to Fort Jefferson, then the port of Tampa. And he thought, wow, this is better than Spain. So he stayed, and I'm a little unsure of this, he either stayed or he came back, married my grandmother through the mail, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Garcia Vega cigars, but that's my family. The Vega side came in the 1840s, and so I had two relatives that fought for the Union because they came over because of the Carlston's War in Spain. So they fled there and came here and got involved in our Civil War. So we've been in the military a while, and I'd like you also to know that 13,000 Spanish surnamed Americans fought in the Civil War. It was not an Anglo War. And the highest number of troops came from Florida and Texas.
What was it like going to the schools there? Do you remember the school that you grew up going to and attending, and made any friends that along the way that you might still have today? Or
still do. I went all the way through, went to Miami High, and then actually went to the University of Miami. It was an interesting time to grow up because we grew up, my generation, the baby boomers, with all the stories from the Second World War. So the glamour, the excitement, everybody wanted to be a soldier. I grew up playing soldiers, and I don't know how many little rubber soldiers you could probably find at the home I grew up with, buried somewhere in an archaeological dig around the house where we lost all our toy soldiers and cannons, and that was something we always did. And everybody I knew had either souvenirs from the Second World War from either the Pacific or Europe. So we grew up in this milieu of the military, my generation. And so when our time came, the Vietnam War, we still had all these glamorous and great thoughts of patriotism, America, etc. So that's how my generation went to war. Very much more motivated by our fathers who fought in the Great Patriotic War. Now, in the Vietnam era, I didn't go to a great patriotic war. I went to a political war. And now it's economic wars. So I don't see the patriotism anymore. I feel I'm more a tool of the state. I mean, from the Greeks to the Romans to everyone, we're tools of the state. And if they're not coming up the keys, it's a political war. It's an economic war, and we've had to readjust it. And the adjustment came with the Vietnam War, and we know the discord within our society that caused. But my generation, that's what we wanted to do because we wanted to emulate our fathers.
You went to Miami, and you were already in the Naval Reserve at 17. So your father obviously was very pro-military and wanted you to serve. How did the rest of your family, the ones who weren't in the military, how did they perceive it?
Again, the family, the families of that World War II generation, and so in a way, it was expected.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about your friends that you've made through Miami? And maybe some of them didn't join the military, but what did they think about you going in? Because you said it was a hotbed at the time, and I only know from what I've seen through documentaries and other historical pieces.
Well, we weren't the most political down here. I mean, I went to school in Miami, so it was sort of a laid-back sort of thing. But I never saw any negativity. Maybe it's just because of where we were from. I had friends that went off and joined the Coast Guard, others Seabees, and I was already in at 17. And then I met an Air Force recruiter, and he said, "Son, I'm going to give you an airplane with guns on it." And I said, "Well, where do I sign up?" Both my parents are pilots. I, unfortunately, and my cousins are all colorblind. So when I found out that I couldn't fly, it made a great change in my life. That's all I wanted to do. So that's when I went to the dark side.
Did you, before we go further, did you have any career aspirations, or like during your time in college, was there a career path that you were on prior to going into the military that's kind of going to get put on hold?
My father was right of Attila the Hun, so I don't know whether through circumstances, and I don't want to go into it all, but I wound up with an undergraduate degree in Soviet studies. I fell in love with the whole Eastern European history, the history of Russia and the Byzantine Empire, and so that's what I wound up doing, and that really affected my military. I was in advanced AFROTC. They sent me to Biloxi, Mississippi. Well, this is an interesting sort of thing. Let me backtrack a bit. With the Naval Reserve, I was a corpsman. And probably of all the things I did in the military, being a corpsman was the most satisfying. I worked at the hospital that I was born in, where my father worked at. I did a cruise on a destroyer, and I really enjoyed it. Then I got into the Air Force. I trained with Vietnamese and Turkish pilots in Biloxi, and it was very difficult for me. I mean, we would go to class singing "Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder," and I knew it wasn't going to be me, and I didn't want to have a desk job. So I was so disillusioned. I believe the term at the time was tuned in, turned on, and dropped out. So I wound up now, I have 2 honorable discharges, one from the Navy to get into the Air Force. So now I was able to get an honorable discharge from the Air Force. I was, I think, 22 at the time, still in college. And I said, well, they're never going to come after me now. And yes, they did. So I looked to get into either a special forces unit. I was still kind of with that military mindset, wound up in a military police unit, and went through basic training there. And that was, and instead of going to AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, which would have been military, I wound up teaching all of the communist courses. I taught village pacification. I was never the tip of the spear, and that was okay by me. But I trained other soldiers in that particular thing. I remember the first day they took us into, and we went to these classes on communism, and this sergeant, so we marched in our first day at MP school, and he says, today we're going to study the communism, roll the film, and we watched what I thought were cartoons. Every communist had a scar, furtive looking, would never look at you, and I said, no, this is ridiculous. So I went to the commandant of the school and I said, look, I've got 2 years of Soviet history, and I think I can do this and do it better. And he said, son, here's a coffee cup and a stick. You're working for me. And that's how I never went to school, to MP school. I wound up writing the lesson plans for Fort Jackson, Fort Rutgers, and I started teaching communism literally from the fall of the Byzantine Empire, because I felt that if you're going to teach somebody and you're going to make an effective fighting person that is imbued with a sense of his own political system, you have to teach him about the enemy. So in that respect, that's kind of what I did.
Walk me through the process of selecting the Naval Reserve as that initial branch that you're going to join. What was the year and what influenced your decision?
1964. My father influenced my position. And of course, growing up in Miami, we were around boats my whole life. So to me, it was a natural to go into the Navy. I remember going to Great Lakes Training Center, and you're in a bus with 30, 40 other guys, and you're just getting to know them. You're there for a day or so, and all of a sudden you lose your hair, and you don't recognize anybody. We all become this one persona. And I remember our gunny marching us to what he called the Marine Hotel, which was the brig, which is run by Marines, not sailors. And he told us, the one thing you never want to do is go to the Marine Hotel. He scared us silly. And that's why we're good-mannered and we did things by the book. But the Navy was, it wasn't difficult. It was learning a naval trade, a sea trade. I've always felt great that I didn't command a destroyer, but I helmed a destroyer. I mean, a huge naval ship. You know, me, a 17, 18-year-old kid. And I remember the first time we went out for gunnery practice, and I saw the old man sticking cotton in his ears. And I went, oh, what a whip. And when those 5-inch guns went off, it vibrated every cell in my body. So, you always take it from the older people. They know what they're doing. So it was, it was great through that, and taking all the tests, and I qualified for medical, and I thought, wow, this would be great. And I became a corpsman and wound up serving in the infirmary on a destroyer for a cruise, but most of the time at the Naval Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. And I will never forget this as long as I live. Probably one of the things I would rather talk about that wasn't gross, because medical tends to be that way. I was taking some papers over to the OBGYN hut. Now this was a hospital built in World War II, long Quonset huts. And I walk in, and the fleet was in, and my memory of it is there was pregnant women on both sides of the aisle sitting down that just went till you couldn't see them anymore. I'd never seen so many pregnant women in my whole life, but it was a scene of a surrealistic movie. I worked also in part of my time in the mental ward, working with narcoleptic sailors. Amazing. You're talking to somebody and they fall asleep. Right in front of you. In mid-sentence, they will drop. I learned so much about being human, and that was great for an 18-year-old. And now that was my naval training and what I remember most. Except one time I had to pick up a guy, taking him from radiology up to the mental ward, because the mental ward was lockable, and they were locking him up, and he had 2 arms broken, 1 leg out like this, and in a wheelchair. And I said, "Dude, what happened to you? Must have been an auto accident." He said, "No, I just came in from a med cruise and just drank a little bit too much and decided to steal a bicycle at the base post office and rode through the front gates. And the Marine said, 'Halt.' And I said, 'Up yours, buddy.' And he said, the next thing I knew, they beat me to a pulp." So those were the days when the military was a little less sophisticated and much more, there was a fear factor in everything you did. And that's why you became a good Marine, a good sailor, a good soldier. You learned discipline, and they taught you discipline.
Do you have any instructors that you remember? And obviously it's quite a while ago.
Yes.
But you remember them?
I remember like it was yesterday.
Who are they? And what?
Sergeant Major English. This was in the Army. I was a platoon leader at the time, and it was a weekend where nobody was there on base. I stayed on base because I wasn't going to go all the way home for that. And I'm lying in my bunk, and I hear boom, 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 boom. This is on the second floor. And I said, "What is going on down there?" And one of the guys came down. He said, "Valdes, we caught a thief." So I jumped out of my bunk, ran upstairs, and here was a guy in what they called a blanket party. They caught somebody from another company who had come over and was rifling through some of the personal effects. So they had a blanket over him and was just pounding him to death. And then they threw him in the shower, and really weren't going to kill him, but made him so he would never come back. So that was over the weekend. And Monday, we had our company formation, and here was this guy down the company row, 2 black eyes, swollen up, and Sergeant Major English. This man was so, what they call strack. He had built-in creases in his body. His uniforms were perfect. And I mean, this was the man you'd want for your father. He was a god. And I'll never forget this. And that morning, if we went through all the details, he said, "Gentlemen, this weekend, I understand that somebody had an accident. They fell down the stairs. So I don't want anybody ever to fall down the stairs again. I dislike it when things like that happen in my camp." And that was the last that was ever said about it. And if you'd seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, they had a guy that went psycho. This kid went psycho. And I was acting as my company sergeant's backup, always watching his back, because we were afraid that this guy would go over the hill. And as it was, I don't think he wound up going to finishing basic. But I do remember Sergeant Major English. That was just one thing. But to see the man walk, he had creases in his walk. Unbelievable. He was the soldier.
Yeah.
I don't care whether it's Great Lakes or Fort Jackson or Keesler Air Force Base. That first day is always the same. You're just starting to meet the people around you. You've never met them before. You're going in and they take you off and then they strip you of your hair. Then they strip you of your clothes, and we're all wearing the same things. And we're being yelled at constantly, and you don't know which way to turn. And you're lining up, and it's something so different than what you're used to civilian life. You don't think, you just do. And they will train you to do. Don't think, do. And after a few weeks of that, you do. And also, I remember coming home. Again, this was, and you're skinny, you've lost all this weight, and the military gave you these big, bulky, baggy underwear, and you looked ridiculous. You looked like a scarecrow with these huge bloomers, and but the people that you went through basic training with, you never forgot them. It's the first time, I think, as you matured as a male, that you really bonded. We suffered. And if one guy screwed up, everybody suffered. And it built a spirit decor, or whatever they call it. It's the military. You look back, and it's kind of like after you retire, you think, "Gee, I'd like to go back to work again." Oh no, I forgot about the stress. It's the same thing with the military. You think only of the good times. I don't know how your mind wipes out the bad, but it's a bond. It's a male bond. Well, now it's male and female bonding that you can get nowhere else.
Right. Did you find it initially challenging to adapt to the militarization? Because I assume by the time you go to the Army, the Air Force, National Guard, that you already are militarized at that time. So you know the routine, you know how things work. But at Great Lakes, did you ever find it challenging to adapt to it?
Great Lakes was challenging, and every time you screwed up, they found out, and that was just making your bunk. And when they say they're going to flip a quarter on your bunk, it better be, because if it doesn't, they're going to rip it to pieces and throw everything on the floor, and you have to start all over again. And it doesn't matter how good it was, it ain't good enough. But you learn through that, and yes, it was challenging. They challenge you so much physically that all you want to do is eat and sleep. and they deprive you of sleep. I mean, I can still remember at dark 30, maybe it was 5:30 in the morning, our gunny would come up and he would have a garbage can and start banging on the sides of it, and you were up and you couldn't think. It didn't pay to think. If you thought about it, you were in trouble.
How did you feel when you finally completed training for the first time?
When you complete basic training, and I remember specifically wearing blues, the navy blues, and of course you got 13 buttons on the front that you have to unbutton each time you want to use the facilities. But it didn't matter. You didn't want to use a zipper. You wanted that tradition and the uniform. You felt so proud to be in it because you were still alive. And it's interestingly enough, from the Navy and then going into the Army. In the Army, I was at the time that the military was changing from physically abusing, and I don't mean physically abusing in a bad way, but there was physical abuse in basic training. And then they were pitting the groups that you got knocked around, kicked around, pushed around, and you were going up again against the group that was, okay, guys, let's do it all together, and we'll have a great time, and we'll get through this thing. Actually, they actually outperformed us from the old style of military training. So it's changed quite a bit, and probably for the better.
I would assume so. Did during your naval career, did you make any friends while you were serving, and who were they? Who stood out the most during your naval time? And do you still keep in touch with those individuals, or had for a long time or not?
Richard Wall and I became really good friends. We took a cruise on the USS Hunt, and we went to New York City. And I remember when the ship pulled into the Brooklyn Naval Yard, the captain got out there and he says, okay, boys, first thing I want you to do is you want to get you out of Hell's Kitchen. I don't want to see anybody in this area. This is really a bad area. Go someplace else. So Richard took me to the New York City Yacht Club because he was a sailor in Miami, and we went and saw the America's Cup. And we've been in touch, up till a year ago, 2 years ago, and I haven't been able to get him. But yeah, you form relationships that last a lifetime.
Wow, that's amazing, though. It's a very long friendship, even if it's on and off, talking. It's crazy how long you can remain in touch with people and experience some unique stuff together.
And Richard and I were going to get tattoos. I wanted an anchor. I wanted that on my forehand, but we drank too much and we were running late and we didn't get it. Thank you, Jesus. I'm so glad I didn't get that tattoo on my arm, on my hand. But that's what you wanted to do then.
Yeah. Do you recall any other particularly humorous or unusual events that you're allowed to share during the naval time? So this would be like when you're working either in Jacksonville or in New York.
Yes, there was one that was extremely humorous on the ship, and I wish I could tell you about it, but I can't. Well, I'll tell a little bit of it. A snipe is the guy who works down in the engine room. And as enlisted, you always felt the snipe was probably the bottom of these are the guys that worked in the worst possible places. And there was a guy, and his name was Oots. and I was birthing in gunnery, and he was very strange. They were very strange people. You met them in the military, and you just kind of worked with them. So, and the people that I met were very strange. And now there are other people that think, oh, how can you have gays in the military, transgenders, whatever? It doesn't matter. You're a unit. You work with these guys, and even the crazies. You work with them and you get your job done. So, and I can't go into what Oots did, but it was on a bet, and he took the bet, and best that he should be left alone. I'll tell you off camera.
Okay. So you were a corpsman during your naval time. Did you experience any promotions? I would assume at least one or two.
At that time in '64, Vietnam was just starting to get really moving, and it was very difficult to move up in medical. Guys just didn't move. So it was, I was an E3, and I stayed there, and that was okay, because as a corpsman, everybody wanted to be your friend. I mean, we were often called Doc, long arm inspectors. We had various names, and on the ship, we were always inside, not out on deck where it's cold, windy, and wet. And everybody wants to be on your good side because you're going to help them out. And just as I was getting out of the Navy, I was asked to become a fleet marine, and that's just to go in as a corpsman with the Marines. And they were offering, I think, $10,000 if I read up for another 2 years. And the $10,000 bonus was nice, but a Marine corpsman had approximately 12 minutes lifespan on a beach. So I thought, well, maybe not yet. I like the hospital ward. So I didn't take advantage of becoming a Marine, though I have the greatest respect for fleet Marines.
So when did your naval career end? Do you remember the date or the approximate?
It would have been 66 or 67, sophomore in college, and a Air Force recruiter got hold of me and said, "Son, you should be in the Air Force." So that's when I left. I was walking past a student union, and the Air Force recruiter was there with his desk, and both my parents are pilots, and he said, "Hey, son, you can fly an F-105, a Thud," which was the largest fighter bomber in the Air Force, and I'm, well, okay. And long and the short of it, I'm colorblind, but I didn't really pick up on that till after I'd signed my life away, and then I got my first my first honorable discharge from the Navy, and then was in the Air Force. But the Air Force, I went through OTS with South Vietnamese pilots and Turkish pilots. And the big difference between training as a enlisted and training as an officer, yes, the officer training was physically tough and very demanding, but psychologically very, very demanding. I remember one night, and I don't know how far it was into my training, just lying on my bunk and crying. The stress level that they put you through as an officer was much more than anything I'd ever gone through. I mean, the physical thing, yes, it's stressful, but the mental, and once I had that good cry that evening, then boom, I was back up and going the next day, and that really helped me. But that was the main difference. And I again made a comment to our TAC officer. I noticed he had a brown sock and a black sock on one morning, and I said, "Sir, your socks are wrong." And he says, "Valdes, very, very good. You're very observant. So you're so observant, I'm going to make you the bird calling expert. So anytime I see you, I'm going to ask for a bird report. And when I ask for a bird report, I want to know what kind of bird it was, where you saw it, and what that bird sounded like." So every time in the mess hall, he would be eating with these other tactical officers, and he'd see me and he'd go, "Valdes, give me a bird call." So I'd have to jump up straight. "Sir, I saw a blue-headed purple thrust, and he made the sound caw, caw, caw. I saw him at 07:30 this morning, sir." And that went on for a month. He just loved it. And I never, ever commented on anyone's uniform after that who had a rank higher than mine.
Is that your most vivid memory of training, or is there other ones that were?
Oh, no, the vivid memories were the South Vietnamese pilots wore gabardine, the most beautiful uniforms you had ever seen. I thought they were a little bit arrogant. I became friends with a Turkish pilot, and their first tour is 12 years. You signed the dotted line. You're in the military for the first 12 years. You signed your life away. And he said to me, he says, "We don't fear the Russians. We beat them half a dozen times in a million different things over history. We fear nothing." And they were incredible. And getting to be with other air forces, but having to march down the line every morning underneath the wings of the aircraft, singing "Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder," and not knowing that it wasn't going to be me was difficult. I didn't want a desk job. I wanted to be in a combat arm, and that's I remember that vividly. Correct. I wound up getting a pilot's license, but only it was with restrictions. I couldn't fly at night, couldn't take gun signals, so all I wanted to be was a commercial pilot, and that career wasn't going to be mine anymore. So. It was a turning point in my life. I couldn't be what I'd always wanted to be. I couldn't be in the combat arm, and I didn't want to be an Air Force employee working a desk. And that's when I guess I got tuned in, turned on, and turned off, and started to become much more anti-war, much more politically involved. And that's when I resigned my commission, because I could resign that commission up to the date of commissioning. So that's how I left the Air Force. I didn't want to have anything to do with the military after that.
So it was a short-lived time during your service then?
Yeah, it was a year of advanced Air Force ROTC, and then a 9-week training in Biloxi, Mississippi.
So how were your feelings when you resigned? Was it a sense of relief? I'm going to go back to being a civilian and just kind of do my normal thing for a little bit?
It wasn't a relief. It was sort of a bittersweet. I mean, when your whole life you've been militarized in a good way in our generation, and then to find out you couldn't fight and Vietnam was really starting to boil up, and you couldn't do what you wanted to do. And I had a girlfriend, and I could. That assuaded a lot of the problems, and my cousin wanted me to come join him in the Army as an officer, because he was going to officer candidate school, and I just said, no, I don't think so. But I didn't have any, if that's what he wanted to do, fine. If you got called up, fine. It's what you had to do. I think most of us, the vast majority of people, whether you were anti-war or you didn't care, it was just like, I don't like people saying thank you for your service. It wasn't service. It's an obligation to my country. And, if you want to do it, that's fine. But I also have the right not to do it, because we're fighting a political war, and I don't believe in the aims of it.
So what did you do after you resigned your commission? Like, what did you have a plan and career, or before we go into the Army? Like,
just to go back to school and working on a degree and get that degree. I didn't have it much. Didn't know where I was going particularly, but I knew that was the goal that I needed to get next.
Did you return back to Miami?
Yes.
So we have a little break of time between your military services, and then something changes, and you're going back in.
I got a draft notice.
Oh, there we go.
I said, how could this be? I have 2 honorable discharges. How could this be? A bureaucracy could find me after this? And so I said, well, what the hell? I'll see if I can get a special forces unit, some kind of combat arms. And it was very difficult to get into the reserves, because everybody who didn't want to go to Vietnam was in the reserves. So luckily, I found a military police unit, and I got in. I got into that.
What was training like for the Army? Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier. You said most of it's the same.
Different insofar as the difference between me at 18 and 22. I now had college behind me. I had a bit more worldliness, if you would.
What year is this?
This is 68,
okay.
67. And when I went into basic, I knew what was coming, so I was prepared for it, and it was Vietnam was really going. We had very few NCOs, so they were ruling through. They were running Fort Jackson and every other fort with a minimal amount of people and a great amount of intimidation. That's the only way they could control these large groups. But I was a college guy. I kind of had some smarts. So, well, it's an easy way. You either go through with nobody knowing who you are, or you go through with everybody knowing who you are. So I chose to go that way, and it was pretty much of a snap.
Nice.
But it was somewhat scary. Because everybody knew when you finish training, we're all going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So you always had that in the back of your mind as you went through training.
Was there at this time you're being drafted? You have a little bit more of an anti-war sentiment. Was there any anger when you got that draft notice?
No, none whatsoever. just total surprise.
Okay. It's pretty unique though that you have that perspective, and you have a unique perspective of already being in the military and understanding how it works. And
Yeah.
kind of, like you said, you knew what to expect and you understood something that were probably most of the people who were drafted didn't have that.
No, and I can still remember going to the draft process. You went into this huge room and benches of everybody, and there's just 1,000 guys all standing there with paper, and you're standing there in your underwear, waiting to be called. And it was like a cattle processing, and getting shots and people looking down, turn your head and cough. It was unique, and if I was king, I would reinstate the draft. Don't have to go particularly military, but you need public service for 2 years.
When you're completing training, you're going to the military police unit. Is there any special training after that? I assume they separate those who are going to be infantrymen and everything else.
The infantry guys go off to infantry school. I went to MPs. I don't know. Your MOS was made at that time. So we were all split and left Fort Jackson and went to another fort, Fort Benning. MP school was it was essentially infantry. I mean, I wear the blue cord of the infantry, but I'm a military policeman. And
what would be your first assignment once you are completed with training?
Your first assignment, I came back to my unit, my home unit, and we were camp post station. We ran a lot of convoys, jeeps in the front, jeeps in the back, jeeps on the side, and then we shepherded convoys throughout the state. We were actually, and I never got it, but we worked for the governor, and we were the personal military attachment to the government, to the governor when he needed a military escort or whatever. But I never happened to me.
Did you have any unique equipment or anything being in military police that you got to use that some other people probably never got to use and stands out or something like?
I had a 75-pound flamethrower full of CS gas. I have been gassed so many times. We would use CS gas, CB gas, CN gas, and when you're cleaning out the equipment, and everything. I just. I can run into one of those gas houses. It doesn't matter anymore. Maybe I can't do it anymore. But we used to gas ourselves just cleaning our equipment.
Okay. Much different standards today, I would assume.
I would hope. I would hope.
So, was most of your career, or was all the career in the United States?
Yes.
Okay. So. Walk me through the bases again, or the agencies that you were serving at. So you were, after the assignment, you were at what base?
Okay, in the Navy, I was at NAS Jax. I was on the destroyer USS Hunt. In the Army, I was at Fort Jackson, Fort Rutgers, Benning, and then that was the National Guard time and Army time. And then when I finished out my career, because I graduated from University of Miami in 1970 and moved to New Jersey for my first job. And that's where I joined the 335th Surgical Evac Unit.
You're still in college and working on the side during all this too? So you're like half military, or it's just all strictly military?
All strictly military. I'm glad you brought that up. Did I work in college? No, I didn't work in college. I got married. What was I thinking? At 22. But she graduated ahead of me, and so she was a social worker. And actually, my ex-wife, who I'm still in touch with all the time, went on to be a national figure in PSTD. Worked for the VA her whole life. So she's and still does it, private practice. She took my daughter, and they went to Vietnam, went to play coup. They went to, you name the battlefield. My wife ran through it because she wanted to get the real feel. So when she's talking to somebody with PSTD, that she could relate at least on some level. And she found, while she was there, she was in touch with North Vietnamese vets, and the PSTD was absolutely the same. There was no difference.
Not a lot of understanding of that at that time either.
No, she basically grew up. She wrote a number of papers and was published. And
Did we mention your friendship with a gentleman from your naval career? Is there anybody from your Army career that you stayed in touch with or became friendly with?
actually, nobody right offhand except my cousin.
Who was the officer?
Yeah. He came to visit me while I was in basic training. Now, my cousin Larry is a very quiet, conservative guy. Very quiet, very conservative. Never raises his voice. And he was a splendid officer. So he picks me up. He just goes on base and he asks for me. And man, I had a sergeant come trotting out, grab me, and off I went with Lieutenant Koenig. And we're driving across base. He slams on the wheels, the brakes of the car, and jumps out. And there was some soldier diddy-bopping down the street. He didn't have his jacket coat. And I said, "That's my cousin?" And dressed him up and down for it seemed like 5 minutes. And that was interestingly, he never opened up to me. He broke down just one time, and this was probably in the last 5 years. He couldn't, a lot of things he couldn't say and bring out, and it just, it all came out at once. And we've been close, and he wrote me, I wrote him, and we stayed in touch throughout his tour. And it's another story completely, but yeah, that's probably the one person that I was affiliated with most.
Okay. What time frame is this again for your Army career? So
67 to 1970.
Okay. And then you're done.
Yeah, that took 8 years. And I almost went back into the reserves again. My cousin said, "Come on, let's get in the reserves. You don't have to sign a contract. You can get out anytime you want." So I said, "Great. I'm going to look for either a medical unit I want to fly, or something with Army aviation." I couldn't find anything, and I wasn't going to be into. If I was going to be in the reserves, I was going to be in a unit I wanted to be in, and I couldn't find what I wanted. That's always been a big regret. I should have stayed in. I probably could have gotten out as either a master sergeant or an officer had I chose to go to officer training school, and it would have been a nice thing to have in retirement. To me, one of the best things that I remember from the military in general, from the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, was polishing my boots. It's the one time that you had free time that you could talk to your buddy. to your buddies. We'd all be together, and we're all polishing our shoes, and that was a military ritual. You're polishing your shoes, you're polishing your buckles. I always look at that as a really nice, they're great memories where we just had this little bit of social time before lights out, and that's a good memory for me.
What would you say your best part of your service experience is?
The best part was the camaraderie that you got with the people that you were in there. You were all in there for the same thing, and it was that sense of unity.
What would be your proudest moment of your career? Whether it's the Navy, your brief time in the Air Force or the Army?
The proudest moment, I guess it would have had to have been in the Navy. And I don't know how it happened. I was a new corpsman on the ward, and they assigned me a terminal cancer patient. His name was Quimbley. Still remember his name. And he was our age. He was in the Navy. He had terminal cancer. I don't remember the cancer, but I had to clean him. He was my personal ward, and that was my proudest moment. And just being able to serve him till he died. As I was saying, it was a pretty bleak time, and there were people that literally couldn't march. They didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other, and so one night while I was writing letters home, I wrote this poem about basic training, and to me, this pretty much symbolizes everything I went through. And I call it the assembly line. 1,000 colors, sizes, shapes fill my brain. A humming mass of bodies mill like so many listless cattle. A sharp bark of orders. The mass quiets. A line forms. A formation grows. One man, one barber. To equalize, to conform. Hair falls like leaves in autumn tumbling from 1,000 heads. One head, 1,000 bodies. A sharp bark of orders. Jammed like cattle for slaughter. Arms, legs, bodies pushed, squeezed. Truckloads of flesh soon to be the cannon's harvest. Off to be pressed in olive drab molds. 1,000 bodies no more. Row on row of men, faceless bodies, olive drab putty. From 100 barrack windows, blank windows stare in mute silence to their role in the game. One body, one building, one mind. A rational being no longer. Long green lines drawn up in front of pale yellow buildings. Their floors worn for the youth of 4 generations. A sharp bark of orders. Training begins. Tramp, 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 the earth beneath their feet. Tramp, 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 a deadly steady beat. What nature has wrought and man has built will soon be trampled beneath these feet. To kill without mercy, cries the bayonet. 1,000 throats take up the mind and the cry. 1,000 throats and not one mind. Around and around crawls the hand on the clock as time slides, but warriors grow. 7.62 millimeter, scientific killer, windage knob. Wow, I don't even know why I'm getting 7.62 millimeter. I can't go on with this. And I never had to go into combat. 7.62 millimeter, scientific killer, windage knob, center visible mass, lock and load 120 round magazine, a scientific killer, a machine of war 1,000 years old, held high to prove man's worth. Needless bloodshed? Never. We fight for peace. We fight for the right, for a warped ideal, for a divided country. That was Fort Jackson in 1967.
Thank you. And
it's the Latin in me.
a lot of
I hope it sounded as good to you as it sounds to me, because damn, I can't believe I wrote this stuff.
for a little bit of time, I closed my eyes just to take in the words and kind of envision what you're thinking about, as a young man who just got drafted and trying to understand the mentality of what is making you think that way. Because now it's way different. There is no draft like you mentioned previously. And
it's a job.
Yeah. We sign up voluntarily to do it. And to get a perspective of a young American who got drafted and what your thoughts are is very important, I think, and very eye-opening, because not everybody has the capability to write poetry. And there are probably many, many people who felt the same way and thinking about the same things, and then some of them didn't return.
Yeah.
And that's what's even, that's what makes it powerful as well. I think, thank you very much for sharing that story.
Yeah, I thought this is the best. I wrote a bunch of them, and believe it or not, after I got out, years later, when Desert Storm came along, I wrote another one. And because I was not proud to be in the military till Desert Storm came. And then all of a sudden, I think for a lot of people who were in the military, their pride came back because we whipped their ass. And, we didn't in Vietnam. So that was a rekindling of my military interests. I hope I'm not taking up too much of your time here.
No, not at all. Before I talk about we start talking about your end of service and your life after the military, do you want to share that story about the rock festival? We go from a more, some of the more positive things that you were able to experience. I think it's a unique story.
Yeah. Okay. When I think back on it, I wanted to make a movie of this thing. It could have rivaled any military comedy that's ever been made, but it was my brother-in-law, who he and I are still extremely close. He came running up to me and said, Steve, I got 2 tickets to see the Rolling Stones in West Palm Beach. You want to go? And I said, yeah. And about 20 minutes later, I get a phone call. Your unit has been mobilized for the West Palm Beach Rock Festival. We heard that there's going to be thousands upon thousands of commie pink-coat, long-haired freaks, and the Florida National Guard will protect its civilians. So I was crushed. I had 2 tickets to go, and I couldn't go. So at any rate, a lot of things happened on this. The first thing I want to bring up, and it was kind of a serious thing, we're in convoy. Now, we had been training for the West Palm Beach Rock Festival because of the communist threat and peril to the state of Florida. We had been training on crowd control. Now, when I say we were training, we were coming out. I carried a 75-pound flamethrower filled with CS gas, and on either side of me, I had two soldiers with shotguns, with bayonets, to protect me. We were coming out as the phalanx as the Piasecki helicopter landed in the middle of the West Palm Beach Rock Festival. We're coming down, and I'm supposed to be spraying down the crowd with CS gas, and they've got the bayonets to keep the people away. That's just my unit. We had special forces units operating in the field where nobody could even see them, with radios making contact to make sure that, I don't know, the alligators weren't going to get involved. We had air cover from the Air National Guard flying Hueys, flying Piaseckis. I'm talking the big twin rotor suckers. That's what we were training for, to land in the middle of a rock festival. Now, I was very, very annoyed that I had to put up with this, and I could be there, and be damned if I was going to spray down my brothers that were there. I'd go through the action, but I was not going to pull the trigger on my CS gas. So, at any rate, we spent 3 days there, and literally had enough that we could have taken the island of Cuba back if we had wanted to. So I let it go and forgot about it. And about a year later, a friend of mine, I was at a party, and I met a guy, and I was somehow talking, and he goes, "Oh, I'm a reporter for the Miami Herald." And I said, "Oh, I got a story for you." And so I went through the whole craziness of that rock festival, which I wear the badge proudly on my uniform. I have my state service ribbon. And he said, and I said, "Look, I will tell you all about the National Guard and the craziness. Like, at one time during a summer event, the aggressor troops found out that they had live ammo on their M70 grenade launchers, and should have been fake, but it wasn't. Things like that, and little crazy things. And I said, but for whatever you do, don't use my name." So I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." Another few weeks go by, and it was a Sunday morning. I remember like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my underwear at the living room table in Coral Gables, Florida. I was a U of M grad, almost a U of M grad, and I'm looking through the Sunday Miami Herald, and I opened up the Metro section, and right across the top, Florida National Guard, White Middle Class Country Club. What's this? And I'm reading down sex, rock and roll, as told by a young mustachioed guardsman. I'm the only guy in the unit with a mustache. I didn't put the paper down, and the state was calling me. I had to sign confessions, and actually, I just read it again after these many years. I had it all folded up in a little thing, and there was a lot of inconsistencies there that I never said, and I've never talked to a newspaperman since. But that was my experience serving my state and getting the ribbon that went with it.
Oh, sorry. Steven, do you remember the day that your service ended? Maybe.
I don't remember the date. I just remember getting my 4th honorable discharge. So that ended my military career, and it had a lot to do with my future life, because I trained in 4 different branches. I wound up training people in a couple of those branches, and after being a corpsman in the 336 evac unit, I wound up spending a lifetime. That was my career in medical devices, and I also wound up. My career was in training, and so both of those things I literally picked up while I was in the military, and it's given me a great sense of discipline. And I think any kid coming out of high school needs the military. You grow up, you learn to see what. It's a safe, well, I hate to say safe way of learning life skills. It's a great way to come to who are you? Because you don't know when you're 17 or 18. This will give you the opportunity. So I hold the military in great stead. My greatest regret was that I didn't make the reserves a lifelong commitment. I transferred from the Florida National Guard to the Army Reserves, to the 335th, the Surgical Vac Unit, and that's how I finished out my 8 years in the service.
So then you didn't return back to Miami.
No, I became a corporate nomad. I have worked literally all over the world, and the military taught me a lot of life skills. That's all I can say.
Did you find it hard to readjust to being a civilian? Because you spent a good portion of your 20s.
Not at all. Because I grew up with this military. My generation was the last generation that grew up with the great concept of the patriotic war. And with the love of country, it doesn't come with fighting for resources. It doesn't come for fighting for political ideals. It came from serving your country. And now my grandkids, well, they may be fighting for water.
Did you further your education when you got out?
Yeah, I have a master's degree, and I'm a university professor.
Okay. Did you use your GI Bill, or were those benefits available back then?
No, I went through on a National Defense Scholarship. I don't remember. It was 3% simple interest, and so I was able to pay off my loans within 4 years after I graduated. But it was a national defense loan that was how I finished it out, and my company paid for my master's degree. But I guess the military in the national defense loan got me my bachelor's degree. I tended to brush aside the military and never talked much about it, never really cared about it until Operation Desert Storm. And I think we all were so uplifted because what a war. I was looking for something even worse to happen, but we just went in there, and our high-tech military just won it and gave, I think, anybody who was in the military or had been in the military a great sense of pride in saying, I was part of that group.
Like, what do you think affected your life the most?
Well, the first was being colorblind, and I couldn't be that fair-haired pilot that I wanted to be, and that was difficult to overcome. I really can't answer that. I don't know, but I'm glad I did it. It's something that I can only discuss with somebody who's been through a similar one. You know it, and we have that bonding right there, and nobody else can do that. I mean, it's the most unique thing. And through whether you were a hoplite in Greece in the 3rd century, or fought with a Roman legion, or was in the Civil War or the Spanish-American War, or was in Afghanistan, we all have a bond. We all have a bond. And my son-in-law is a major general in the Swiss Army, and we have a rapport. So it's between nations. It's that, I don't know. It's a military thing. I don't know how to put it into words.
Interesting. Is there any messages you want to leave for future generations who will hear this interview and your story?
I hope we don't have to, we've got to get out of this war thing. What is it with our species? Unfortunately, our very nature, our military nature as a species, it's what makes us great as a species. So I'm almost thinking this is when we go to the stars, we're going to fight our way through the stars. But I think we'll be better off for it. And for future generations, I wish we wouldn't be involved in war. But I'm also a realist, and that's what makes us great. Just like gambling. What happens if Christopher Columbus didn't want to gamble? What happens if Orville and Wilbur said, gamble on a flying machine? We got a great business here making bicycles. So all of these things that we hate about ourselves are the things that make us great. I don't know. We're a strange animal.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share your recollections of your military service. Is there anything you would like to add that we didn't cover during this interview?
No, I'm proud I got to do what I did, and I wish I could have done more.
Is there any other things that you want to share about your service or veteran experience that you've never shared before with anybody?
I'm sorry I never went to combat. I think every male, there's a certain thing. You want to prove yourself. I want to open myself up and say, what am I made of? I'm sorry I didn't get to do it, but don't ask me to volunteer because I won't. that's again that dichotomy.
What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
The veterans, the vast bulk of them come from the lower levels of the socioeconomic cultures that we live in. I don't care whether it's America, whatever country. And we owe these people who put their lives on the line. I mean, how many senators' sons wind up going into the military? It's the vast minority, but it's the peasant farmer that fights for us, whether it's fighting against the isms of fascism or what have you. These are the people that carry the brunt, and we owe them the most.
Well, that concludes our session today.
Well, thank you for even wanting me to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you. We had great discussions before this a couple of weeks ago, probably a month ago now. And thank you for the Military Heritage Museum. You are a volunteer here. And just thank you for everyone to make this happen, come together.
Yeah, thank you.